Do as I say, not as I do. None of us ever listen to that advice. But with Photo Finish Live, there's a good reason you probably should, and that's preserving and growing your money. Hi, I'm Jeffo, also known as Digital Romad on Twitter, and welcome to my latest video on the Photo Finish Live Web3 horse racing game. I'm calling this one Ready, Aim, Fire. Lessons I've learned in my first 2 months playing Photo Finish Live, or said another way, what newbies can learn from my early mistakes. The game has become really popular in the last few months. I mean, it's been growing throughout the course of the last, half year or so. But in the last 2 months that I've been playing, I've seen a lot of newcomers coming into the game. I've seen the prices of horses really begin to escalate. When I got into this in October, around October 11th, I was paying 16 to 20, 25,000 Derby for a horse. And today, you really can't get into a decent horse unless you're spending about 50,000 to 60,000 Derby. So the prices of these horses have really escalated sharply in the last couple of months, which means that now, if you're a newcomer to this game, you're going to be spending $500 to $800 or more, just to get into Photo Finish Live, and that's real money. And you want to make a return on that money. Obviously, you don't want to just run around like a chicken with your head cut off, throwing money all over the place, trying to win a race or buy the right horse or whatever. So as we go into season 10, about a week from now, I thought now was a pretty good time to go through my mistakes to help newcomers understand the game a little better and maybe sidestep some of those mistakes that I made. I'm calling this the headless chicken syndrome, and it's a lot like when you were a kid and you get a new gadget for Christmas or your birthday or whatever, and you just rip the package open and start playing. To hell with the instructions. And yes, that is a fun way to do that, and it's there's nothing wrong with that. It's the learn as you go way of approaching whatever's new in your life. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But with Photo Finish Live, the fact that you're putting down so much money, 500, 800, $1,000, and the fact that you have a limited number of seasons to actually earn income off of your horse, it's probably best that you understand a few things first. I've sort of listed some of these things here, which is, you really don't want to be rushing around without a plan. You want to come to this game with a bit of a plan so you can, sort of plan your purchases accordingly. You really do need to think about strategy involved in this game. You need to understand that buying a horse on grade isn't, always what you think it's going to be, meaning just because a horse has X number of stars, its preference stars, or that it's a certain grade horse, that it is therefore a better horse than others, and that's just not always true. So you really need to understand grade, you need to understand race types, you need to understand attributes of the horse, you need to understand the distance of the races involved to make the best decisions. And that's what I'm going to go through later in this presentation. So let's start with the idea of what do you really want to do in Photo Finish Live? Aside from the adrenaline rush of racing your horse, you have opportunity to breed horses, which is where there is a lot of money in that if you want to do that. But again, there is some big costs involved, particularly if you want to buy a filly so that you are a breeder and you're not just hoping somebody comes to you when you have a colt or a stallion and wants to pay you for it, because a lot of cases there's I would say most of the horses out there, most of the male horses are not breeding. So if you want to be a breeder, you really do need to own a filly, and there's a big cost involved in that. Or you can invest in tracks. You don't have to play the game at all. You can just go out there, buy the right token, the crown token, and you can invest in tracks, and you can generate a passive income from the rest of us who are eagerly throwing derby at this game every single day so that we can race our horses. But it really just depends on what your ultimate plan is with this game. If you do want to get into breeding, I will tell you now that the best thing you can possibly do is buy a filly, a quality filly, as early as you can afford one. I waited to buy my first filly. I was too excited about just racing and building a stable of a bunch of racers, and I would have been better served had I, bought a racer or two, but then instead of buying, eight other racers as I was out doing, had I put that money into quality fillies. When I finally got around to realizing I really do want to breed horses, the first filly I bought was in the 73 to 75,000 Derby range. I could have been buying quality fillies, back in October in the 45, 50, 60,000 Derby range. So I ended up having to spend more money later by sort of not planning early on what I really wanted to accomplish in this game. So I would tell you, if you think you want to be a breeder, buy a filly as early as you possibly can. And if you determine later that you don't want to be a breeder, I guarantee you're going to be able to sell that filly for more than you've bought her for. And with racing or investing in racetracks, it really is as simple as going off and buying crown and staking that crown with the in-game tracks that exist, and you're just going to earn Derby every month that you can then turn around and sell back into the market. It is the easiest way to be a player in this game because you don't have to own any assets to make to make a profit out of it. You just need to own Crown, and you can go buy Crown on on markets like Jupiter or whatever, and just participate in the game that way. But again, it's all about deciding what you want to accomplish in this game. Do you want to race? Do you want to breed? Do you want to invest in tracks? Do you want to do all three? Do you want to do two of those? It really is up to you to decide where you think your best interest lies. For me, I'm involved in all three. And I will tell you, I really do wish that I had been more thoughtful about the breeding component early on, because that's where the real opportunities are, I believe, going forward. And I would have loved to have bought, one or two fillies early on so that I would already be generating an income off of those and I could have bought them at a cheaper price. But again, that's just me. Now, if you're going to be a horse racer or even a breeder, I want to say that grade is important. It's clearly one of the keys to success, but don't assume that a B plus horse is always going to be worse than an S minus horse, or that an A will always beat a B and an S will always beat an A. There are plenty examples in this game of B plus horses winning a race in which an S minus is running. So it tells you that grade, it really is not the be all end all when it comes to buying a horse or even racing a horse. There's a lot of A grade horses that beat S grade horses all the time. Even A minus horses will beat some S grade horses. So, you really need to look at horses beyond what their grade is, and you need to understand what their preference stars are and their hidden internal attributes, which a lot of people overlook. I'm going to go over that in a minute, but those attributes are very important. So I guess the lesson here at the beginning of understanding grade is that you want to buy the best horse you can afford. And generally speaking, buying an S over an A and A over a B is generally going to be an okay strategy, but you really do need to understand all of the internal dynamics that drive that horse, the attributes and the preference stars and whatnot, because that's going to be a lot more important ultimately than just what the grade is. And here's an example of that. Here we have an A that has, beaten an S minus, two S's actually, an S minus and an S. And not only an A beat it, but we have an A minus and a B plus. The first three horses to win place show in this particular race are all above the two S's that ran in this race. So it just tells you that grade is not always the be all end all. And here we have two B pluses that also beat an S grade horse. So don't look at grade as, okay, I have to have an S grade horse, because that's where I'm going to win. Excuse me. The reality is that horses of any grade can win in their races against higher graded horses. It really just depends on the conditions you're racing in, and it depends on the type of track you're running on, and it depends on the internal attributes of each horse in the race. And again, we're going to get into those attribute stuff in just a moment. Grade is important, though, in terms of the races that your horse is eligible for, and sort of the prize pools that you're going to be eligible for participating in. All horses, all lower grade horses can race higher grade. So if I have a B grade horse, I can race him in A and S grade races if I want to, if I think he's going to be competitive there. But an S grade or an A grade can't race down. So an S can't race in A grade races, and an A can't race in B grade races. So you just need to understand that grade is important in some aspects of this game, and they're going to determine, some of the prize pools. The B grade prize pools tend to be smaller than the A grade prize pools, which tend to be smaller than the S grade prize pools. So if you want to race for larger sums of money, you're going to need a higher grade horse. But to race for those larger sums of money means that you have to spend more on that higher grade horse. So you're putting more money at risk. And you just need to, there's nothing wrong with that, but you just need to know how the internals of that horse work, or how you think they're going to work based on your best educated guess, so that you're spending a larger amount of money on the right horse. You're not just buying an S grade horse because it's an S grade horse. There's so much more involved than that. And it starts with understanding preferences, and understanding that preferences really are a suggestion and not the law of the land. They're not set in stone. A lot of newbies assume, as I did, that lots of preference stars means lots of strength in that particular horse, but that's not necessarily so. Preference stars give a horse certain benefits on the track and in the conditions that that horse prefers. So in this particular case, Dr. FOMO, a horse that I own that's retired now, in theory, he has a preference for, tracks that turn to the right. So he's going to get benefit in those particular races. If he's racing in a race with a dirt track that turns to the right, he's going to have some benefits that a horse that has left turning preference on a turf track won't necessarily have in this particular race. So that can be a bit of a strength, but it doesn't necessarily mean that horses follow this to the T. Just like kids growing up in a household with a lawyer and a doctor, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to grow up and become a lawyer and a doctor, even though their preference stars would say that they have, a big exposure to those professions. The reality is, a kid could grow up, loving art or working on cars or whatever. So, they have their own preferences, their own likes. And it's the same with horses in Photo Finish Live. They have preferences, but those preferences don't necessarily define exactly what that horse is going to do and what it's going to like. And Dr. FOMO is a really good example of that, because like I said, he should love right turn tracks and have a strong preference for firm conditions on a dirt surface, given that he has 2 stars in track type, or in track conditions, and in track surface. But the reality is that his podium appearances, 53% of those were in soft and sloppy conditions, which would indicate a soft track preference, not a firm track. So he ran off preference a lot, and he did well in running off preference. So, in this particular case, and he's not a rarity. This happens with a lot of horses. In this particular case, having learned about what this horse likes and doesn't like, allowed me to put him in the races where he was going to, do his best and offer the best opportunity for me to generate a return on this particular horse. If you have a horse, if you're looking at a horse to buy, or you have one that you own that has, two, 1.5, or even one or no preference stars, you're going to need to test those horses in different conditions. Maybe the horse you have, has 2 stars or 1.5 stars, let's say, in firm, but every time you run this horse in conditions that are fast and good, which would indicate a firm track, he's not really doing that well. Well, maybe it's because you need to run him off preference. Maybe his preference stars are kind of lying to you. They're telling you one thing, but the reality is the horse likes something different. So you will need to test that. That said, preference stars really are the best starting point for at least helping you determine the track and the conditions where your horse is most likely going to find success. But again, if you find out that that they aren't running there, aren't running well there, then you're going to want to test them on other tracks and other conditions, because the preference stars really are just a starting point. And they're not really the only starting point, because we have attributes to deal with as well. And these are crucial. These to me are more important than preference stars. I might be wrong about that. There might be other people who would tell you differently, and they're not necessarily wrong. I mean, everybody has their own take on what it requires to be successful in photo finish live. For me, I think the hidden attributes, are a little more important. And I know a lot of newcomers, and I was absolutely one of these, who overlook attributes because they are hidden. When you go buy a horse that's a racer, or you go buy a foal, you have absolutely no clue what their attributes are, because those are only revealed when a horse retires. So it's really easy to overlook these attributes because they aren't hidden. So I will tell you, I did a video on this, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and you can go find it in my YouTube channel, and you just look for the one that has this particular color scheme to it. There are 6 attributes that you need to be aware of, and these are the 6 here. I tend to focus on the top 4, the start, speed, stamina, and finish, because those are the 4 that, when you group them together in pairs of 2, they sort of correlate to distance when you're racing horses. So this is a slide again from that previous presentation. And the groups are start and speed, which are the first 2 there, and they basically correlate with sprints, since you want a horse that is out of the gate really fast and who is up to speed really fast, preferably at higher than grade levels, meaning if you're running an A horse and he has an A plus start and speed, that's a horse you probably want to run at sprints, because he's going to be out of the gate faster than his competition, and he's going to be up to speed faster than his competition, and the race will be over by then, and he will hopefully be on the podium. Then you go to speed and stamina, which represents the middle distance races, since you want a horse that's up to speed quickly, but also has the stamina to last longer than a sprint. And then finally, you have the last 2, which is stamina and finish. And that pair really speaks to long distance races, since you want stamina for these longer distance, but you also want a horse that has finishing strength, the sort of power through the finish line when in the last couple of furlongs, when the rest of the field is beginning to weaken a bit. But you need to look at these attributes. And the question becomes, well, Jeff, how the hell do I do that? Because these are hidden. Well, that's where you're going to begin looking at a horse's bloodline. Excuse me again. So basically, you're going to have to dig through, sort of all the statistics that exist for your horse, and go into Bloodline. It's on the horse's homepage, and you're going to see the two horses that created your horse, and you will see, their individual attributes, and these are the attributes that define what your horse is. Again, you don't know what these attributes are in your horse, but you can get a general idea, a good sense of what they might be by looking at the attributes of mom and dad. And so I've used this example here with a horse I bought, and you can see that mom and dad together generate a horse that has a combined score of A for start, A for speed, S minus ish for stamina, and A plus for finish. Now, this is just a 50-50 split between mom and dad. And that's not exactly how the game works. There's more than a 50-50 split involved. I don't know the internal mechanics. I don't know the secret sauce. None of us know the secret sauce that goes into breeding and how attributes are combined internally. So the best we can do is basically do a 50-50 split to get a general idea of what a horse might be looking at in terms of its attributes internally. So in this particular case, this horse I have is an A grade horse. But when you begin looking at some of his, strengths and whatnot, his attributes, you see that, he has a 1.5 grade jump effectively in stamina. He goes from A right past A plus into sort of an S minus ish range. So it's almost a 1.5 grade jump there. And given that he is, running at grade for start and speed, that means in the early part of the races, he should be kind of in the middle of the pack. He should be running with the rest of the horses. But as the track, as the distance goes into sort of middle distances, he should be excelling at that. And you can see that's exactly what he's done. He's had some really strong results in middle distance races, 6, 7, 8 furlongs. He does really well. He's sort of killing it there. He's not doing so well in short distance races, and he doesn't do so well in long distance races, but in the middle, he's really killing it. And that to me is an example of his attributes, the attributes that it was passed on by his parents. And again, this is not a true 50-50 split. It's going to change. There's going to be all kinds of ways that it sort of changes internally, so that maybe it's a 53-47 split or a 40-60 split or whatever it is that happens, in the breeding process. But the best we can do is a 50-50 guess. And it's good enough to at least give you a general idea of what's going on inside your horse, and that you can begin to use to choose the right races for your particular horse. And speaking of races, you need to really think about race types and distance. Horses, just like people, we have certain things we like. Horses like different race types, and they like different distances. There's 6 race types and there's 9 distances, and they're not all equal to a horse. It's not necessarily that running a horse at 5 furlongs is the same as running a horse at 11 furlongs. They just don't respond to the distances that way. And nor are race types interchangeable. Just because a horse likes running in a stakes race doesn't necessarily mean he's going to like running in a handicap race. So you really need to understand, what your horse likes so that you can make the best decisions. And you can see all this information, when you're looking at the different race types of different races. It'll tell you what type of race it is and the distance and whatnot. I'm sure you're familiar with that. But I just want to point that stuff out. So again, there's going to be, 6 race types that we care about, and it's maiden, which is for young horses looking for their first win. This really is best for early or young horses, juvenile horses. When they are just trying to sort of get their legs under them and try and get your first win. But you've got to be aware of grades. Otherwise you're going to end up with a B grade horse racing against S grades. And yes, I noted earlier that in some of those instances, B grade can absolutely beat an S grade. It happens all the time. But that doesn't mean it is common. In most cases, if you put a B grade horse against an S grade horse, the S grade is going to win because it is a theoretically stronger horse because of its grade. So you just really need to be aware of grades when you are putting your horse into a race. Claiming, this is basically, hanging a for sale sign on your horse. These are best for horses you don't necessarily want to sell, but you don't mind losing for the claiming price. Or if you do want to sell it at the claiming price, that's great. Go ahead and put it in a claiming race and see if it gets claimed. But I will say you really do need to be careful if you don't want to sell. And I see a lot of horses that are put in claiming races, and they're sold, and the owner is kind of upset that he or she lost his horse because they didn't really want to sell. They just wanted to run in a race they thought they could win, and lo and behold, their horse got sold, and now they're out a horse that they wish they still had. And also beware of the claiming price. Don't run a 50,000 Derby claiming race. If you have a horse that you think is worth more than that, or don't run a horse in a 30K claimer, if you've spent 40,000 Derby on it, because this horse will be claimed at 30K. And you're going to be, out a bunch of Derby because you picked the wrong claiming race. On the upside, I would tell you, if you have sort of a horse, let's say you spent 30 or 40 or 50,000 Derby for, and it is a fairly decent horse, and it might be winning, at the A minus or A level, or even B plus level. Don't turn around and decide you're going to run that horse in a 250,000 Derby claiming race, because those races are going to be filled with a lot of high dollar horses that have a lot of strength and have won big races, and they're going to be all S minus, maybe some S pluses in there. And if you're going to run like a B plus or an A minus horse in that race, chances are you're probably going to lose, and you've just put a bunch of money on a large claiming race that you're not going to get anything out of. So just be aware of that. Allowance races. This is where weight is added to each horse to balance the competition. And it's open to all horses, but some horses are going to carry extra weight to even out that competition. And some horses aren't going to like that. Some horses don't like carrying that extra weight, and they don't do well in these particular races. So you really need to sort of be aware of that. You need to be aware of the grade range as well. As always, beware of the grade range. You can enter any allowance race you want, but horses below the stated grade could struggle, meaning, you'll see an allowance race for S minus to S plus. If you have an A minus or a B plus horse, you can absolutely race in that race. But chances are you're probably not going to do very well against those particular horses. So just be aware of that. Handicap. This is very similar to an allowance race, but weight is determined by a horse's grade. Again, this is best if you have higher preference star horses, because they're going to be carrying extra weight in this competition. And again, entering a lower grade horse into a higher grade race can present challenges in a handicap race. But again, lower grade horses can win at times, so don't always be put off by that. If you have a horse that's been doing really well and you want to run him in a handicap against higher grade horses, by all means, try that and see how you do. Stakes. This is sort of a test race for the show. the big races. Is your horse good enough to race at the highest levels? You want to run stakes races for that. This is best for horses that have higher preference stars, generally, 7.5 and up. These are high quality races. And some of them are going to accept horses of any grade. Some of them are only going to accept horses of a certain grade. So you do have to pay attention to that. And finally, we have the graded stakes. This is the show, the big time, the Kentucky Derby kind of things. But you got to beware because, this really is an option for the high preference star horses in S grade or really high quality A plus horses that have done incredibly well even in S grade races. So, when you're talking about graded stakes, it's open to pretty much everybody, every horse. So just be aware that if you put like a B plus horse in, let's say, a grade 1 stakes, you're going up against some of the biggest competition out there, and it's going to be tough to win that race. So just be aware of the types of races that you're putting your horses in, because that's going to have a big determination on whether or not your horse makes it to the podium. And again, there's also juvenile races. So if you have a foal that becomes, a 2-year-old and starts racing for the first time, those are juvenile races, and we have juvenile races for all of those categories, and it's only open to 2-year-olds. So juveniles can do well in a lot of these. That doesn't mean a juvenile who does well in those races is going to become a 3- and 4-year-old that does well in those same races, as I've learned. So just be aware of that. And as with race type, horses have distance they like to run. Obviously, you'll see the distance stated in each of the races, so you know what you're running at. The sprints are 4, 5, and 6 furlongs. Middle distance 7, 8, 9. Long distance is 10, 11, and 12. Just because a horse does well at a sprint doesn't mean he's going to do well at long distance. Conversely, just because a horse does really well at long distance doesn't mean he's going to do well at sprint. So you have to figure out, where does your horse like to run? And the question becomes, well, again, how the hell do I know that, Jeff? We're going to go back to, the internal attributes of your horse. And we're going to start with a racer. This is a sinking down horse I bought not long ago. And what you want to do is you want to go down here and you want to click on the download CSV file, which is basically an Excel file, and you want to pop that open. And you want to go through and you want to sort races. So I've done this before in a previous video. I showed how I do this. I basically just highlight all the races and I sort them first by finish position. Always sort first by finish position, so I can see where this horse has been on the podium, and I highlight all of those in red, and then I sort by distance. I immediately turn around and sort by distance because I want to see the distance at which this horse has been running. Where has he been showing up on the podium? And that gives me a great starting point for my research. Now, when it comes to 2-year-olds, you're not going to know that because they don't have any race history. So again, we're going back to bloodline and looking at what mom and dad are all about. And this is an example of a horse I bought called Independent Georgie. And you can see mom and dad's attributes right there. And when you marry those attributes, you end up with a horse that has this combined score. Now, again, this is sort of the 50-50 split, and I've caveated this by saying I don't know that 50-50 is the right split, but it's the best split I have without knowing the secret sauce. So in this particular case, I have an A- horse who has A plus-ish start and speed, has an S-ish stamina, and an S-ish finish. So what does that tell me? Well, it tells me that in sprints, she's likely to be faster than grade out of the gate and faster than grade with speed. So she should do well in sprints because she's going to be running faster than her A- competition. She's going to be running almost at an A plus ish level, which is sort of 1 to, let's call it 1.25 grades above her A minus status. And then when I go across to middle distance, well, suddenly she's running, S minus ish stamina, which puts her almost 3 grades ahead of her A minus competition, which would imply that, she should be running above grade at speed. She should be up to speed faster than her competition. And she should be being able to, continue to run her stamina at substantially above grade, at nearly an S minus. So she should do really well in middle distance races. And then when we look at long distance races, which I'm particularly interested in when she starts racing, she has an S minus ish stamina and an S minus ish finish. So she's well above grade when it comes to long distance horse running, or long distance races, I should say. She's going to be well ahead of her competition there. So I'm really excited to run this particular horse in long distance races because I think she's going to excel there because she's going to be running against A minus, A plus competition, and she's going to have S minus ish attributes at those levels. So she should do quite well. And finally, I'll wrap up by saying, you really do need to think long term. As a newcomer to this game, you really have to begin to quickly think about what you want out of this game. It's fun to race immediately. Absolutely. I was the same way. But you got to think about, your bigger opportunities. As I noted earlier, breeding is a huge opportunity in this game because of the money that comes out of breeding horses and selling them into the marketplace. The team who built Photo Finish Live did not populate the game with every horse that's ever going to exist. And it's up to us players to basically breed horses and put them up for sale. And the way I see it, there's going to be increasing demand for horses as this game grows. Clearly, the S-grade horses are going to be the holy grail, but not everyone is going to be able to afford an S-grade horse. So there's going to be a lot of demand for A and B grade horses. And when they begin to exist, there's going to be demand for even C and D grade horses at the lower end for sort of would-be stable owners that want to be involved in this game and want the income potential out of Photo Finish Live, but who aren't going to be able to spring for an A and B grade horse, which at that time they're probably going to be, well over $1,000 a pop, and you're going to be able to buy some of the C and D grade horses for substantially less and still get involved in the game and still win because you're going to be racing C and D grade horses at C and D grade levels, and there's going to be income to generate from that, and you're going to be able to invest in the racetracks with Crown, etc., and still continue to generate passive income from that. So you really do need to start thinking long term the minute you get involved with the game. When I got involved, as I noted, I was paying 16,000 Derby for a horse, which was about $200. I was buying foals for as little as 24,000 Derby, which is about $300. And today you're talking about 50,000 Derby or $625 to buy a quasi decent racer. You're going to spend easily 75,000 Derby or about $940 to buy a high grade foal. And if you want to buy a high grade filly these days, I'm telling you now, those prices are really moving. You really want to buy these as early as you can. I bought a 7.5 star filly, A minus grade, I'm sorry, and I spent 73,500 Derby. And today, just a B grade with 3 stars is going to cost you 120,000 Derby or $1,500. When you go into S minus with 7.5 stars, those are up above 150,000 or more Derby. So you really need to think ahead if you realize you want to be a breeder and you want to be more involved in this game than just racing. If you really want to find a way to earn an income off of this game, it's going to come through breeding as one of your best opportunities, and which is why I say you really need to buy a high grade filly as early as you can, as early as you can afford one, so that you can grow your stable by basically bringing another horse into the game every season that you can either run, put it in your stable and run it, or that you can sell for potentially big dollars. And with that, I will say see you on the podium. I hope this has been helpful. I hope you've learned some of the mistakes I've made and how to hopefully avoid them.